What is up, coordinators? It is Monday. No, wait, it's Tuesday. It's Tuesday, May 12th, week 20, 2020. We're still in the middle of a quarantine here in New York City. I've been getting into my studio, trying to get some work done to try to stay productive. And even though it's not client work right now, at least it is work that is getting me more efficient and streamlining my business so that once we come through on the other side of this quarantine, we'll be ready to hit the ground running and really start jumping back into client work. So in doing that, I'm building a web app called Serenity. Last week, I did a little coding session that you can check out if you're interested, where I was doing some updates to the app. And I think we'll jump into the same thing again this week. What I try to do every Monday is to do a weekly review, planning a review of the previous week, planning session for the current week. Yesterday, I got a little tied up in some other activities and didn't get into my review in time to be able to make a video and edit a video and publish a video yesterday. So best opportunity when you fall off the wagon in terms of routine is to take that as an opportunity to jump back into routine. So every time you miss something that you had planned to do, rather than getting discouraged and falling further behind, use that as an opportunity to jump right back in and say, today is the day where I have a chance to practice getting back to routine. So today, Tuesday, May 12th, week 20, we're going to do our weekly review and let's jump right into it. So I have Serenity loaded up right here. You can see I have my projects all listed on the left-hand side. We have a working Photoshop document that I made that we're trying to work towards slowly 1 week at a time to do updates to get us closer to this goal of how we want the site to look. And what's interesting is in doing the implementations that I've already done in the past week to get the goals section added, I'm starting to kind of refactor and rethink how exactly I want goals and tasks to work together. And I think what I want to do this week actually is update this design so that goals is more prominent, tasks then become a subsection of goals. And it's all about just projects and goals, and then tasks and journal entries being subsets of both of those. So I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to do some updates to this Photoshop document before we do any more updates on the actual site. But why don't we jump into how we use the site every week to set my goals, to review how I'm doing on my progress, and to basically plan out my days, my weeks, and hopefully my quarters and years as well. I think it's going to be nice to have longer term thinking involved in this project as well. And all projects that I use this app to help me organize. So let's start with my personal projects. Let's see what I'm working on here. So on a personal side, I want to be shooting and editing and publishing a daily video like this, whether it's this or whether it's photography work that I'm doing or going for a skate or whatever it is. I'm trying to do something every day to give me a chance to kind of practice making videos and practice editing them and putting them out and figuring out how to work with YouTube. So that's my number one priority on a personal level every day. And a big part of that is getting here into the studio. I'm doing a skate or a bike from the Upper West Side every day. It's about 12 miles each way. So from a physical perspective, that's been really helpful to get out of the house, to get some fresh air, not riding public transit, not interacting with other people. I'm not going to work in an office where I'm working with other people. It's literally just me here in my photo studio all by myself. So that's a big personal goal. Let's make sure, well, you know what, let's add a goal there. So I have my goals here, make daily video, but also get to the studio every day. And you can see the way that I worded that. That's already worded as a weekly goal. So if I wouldn't say every day, if that was my daily goal, because then every day I'd have to make a new goal and say get to the studio that day. But to make it an overall weekly goal, I can say get to the studio every day of that week. And that could even become a monthly goal too if I wanted to make it a longer term thing. But as you can see here, our goals don't have time periods to them yet. It's just simply goals. So we need to be able to say that goals are either daily, weekly, maybe quarterly, or yearly. I think probably those would be the four categories that we'll have for goals. And then you can kind of view the different categories depending on what you're working on at any given time. So that's what I've got going on with my personal projects. And then of course with Serenity here, I really want to make sure that I'm spending a good amount of time every week updating the website, getting closer to this picture that we see here in Photoshop of how we want this website to look over the next few weeks, hopefully. So as you can see, my idea for goals here was to have daily, weekly, and yearly. I've already thought about maybe adding quarterly to that. And also now we're talking about implementing goals as being the main section up here instead of tasks. I think we'll get rid of activity and put activity as a separate page, maybe put like an icon up here that shows you what your activity is. You can click it and then view more graphs and stuff. But of course, that's going to be further down the road. So for goals, I think what we're going to do is we're going to make it a double wide section up here, get rid of tasks completely, and then have tasks be checkable items underneath individual goals. So tasks, rather than just being overall tasks that belong to projects, the tasks will belong to goals. So each goal will have subtasks that we can create and organize to see how we're making progress on different goals. So yeah, that's where we're at. Let's take a look at the Serenity project here on the website. So you can see I have my list of to-dos here, and obviously goals is more prominent than to-dos. So right away we can see that the way that it's organized on the site right now is not ideal. We definitely want goals to be front and center. We also want the pages section here. It's a sub pages. So every project that I create can kind of have subsections underneath that to help me organize smaller pieces of that project. And I think what I want that to look like is, you can see here on the main projects page, you have all the list of projects. When you click on Serenity, for example, like we just did, rather than having all those sub projects listed over here, I think we'll have Serenity go up to the top, and then we'll have a sub list of all the pages right here. So we don't need to have, a separate pages section on the right. We can have it all on the left here, and maybe some link to go back up to the main, or maybe just click on projects here to go back up to the main projects page if you want to go to a different project. But you'll always be able to drill down into further subsections of each individual project. And as you do that, you'll see tasks and goals and journal entries that are related only to that subsection. But as you drill further back up, you'll see tasks and goals and and journal entries that apply to everything that's visible from whatever section of the site that you're on. So I think that'll work really nicely. So we have quite a bit of work we need to do in terms of getting the front end here updated, as well as getting our goals section updated on the back end to be able to work with periods, with time periods. So I have a whole list of to-dos here that I'm working on for the Serenity app. Implement time frame for goals, add an edit goal link. I think that'll be useful if we want to change the text of a goal without having to get rid of the goal or check it off and make a new one. We need to add colors for projects. Right, that was a fun idea I had here to kind of make projects stand out, because then as you're listing goals, you can have the project for the goal be listed here and be color coded. I think that could be really nice for the site. It's not really a priority though. So we'll keep that on the to-do list, but maybe that's not something we get to this week. We're going to redesign the projects index page. That's this page here where we can see all of the projects. We're going to redesign that to kind of look like this here, so that it incorporates every goal and every task under every project to be visible on the main page. And then as you drill down, you see ones that are related only to those projects that you're drilling down into. So essentially we want this index page here to look very similar to the way that this page is going to end up being designed. This is the project show page, or the actual page for an individual project. They're all going to end up looking very similar. It's just a question of what information gets shown on that page. So we're going to redesign that to include all goals, to-dos, and journal entries. Just like we have here in the Photoshop document. We're going to make to-dos be part of goals. Like we talked about, to-dos will become sub items of goals. We're going to make project sub pages. That's these pages over here, be part of the project's view. So like we said, we're going to move them over into this section here so that they become sub pages under each project. We're going to implement a health section. So I've been doing a lot of skating, a little bit of biking. I really want to implement a health section on the site so I can kind of track my progress, my health related goals. And I have a lot of ideas for that in terms of like diet, maybe supplements, maybe research related to health, where I'm trying to learn more about, what it takes to really live a long and healthy life. So I'm really fascinated by that question, but just keeping track of what my daily data is on my personal health. I'd really like to have a section of my web app that's dedicated to that. So I'm going to start implementing that. And I think at the beginning, it's just going to be about tracking my fitness. So I already use a fitness tracker, but it's data that's on somebody else's app that who knows if that data may just disappear one day. I use an app called Strava. So I want to start downloading that data and incorporating it into my own app so that I know that I have it forever. And I can always just continue to update that and be able to see, graphs and things that I can't see in the app that I use because I can't develop their app. So I might as well take the data and make my own app with it. Even though I use their app for the GPS tracking and all that, at least I can take the data for myself and make interesting graphs and be able to tease information out of the data that's useful for me and maybe inspiring for me. So I'm really excited to implement a health section. At the beginning, it can be really simple. Just, here's an activity I did this day, here's an activity I did that day, and here's the total for the week. So that could be fun to implement maybe this week if we have enough time for it. And then we're going to move stats to its own page with an image link in the header. That's this to do right here. You can see we have this stat section here, which isn't graphed yet. It's just raw data. But the idea was to make it a nice graph like this so I can see my current activity this week compared to last week. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to move that to a new page and maybe make an icon up here in the header bar that links to it, just because it's not, it doesn't need to have a huge section on its own. We really want goals to be the main thing that we're seeing here. And that way I can see the daily goals, the weekly goals, the quarterly goals, and the yearly goals all laid out next to each other. So I always see my yearly goals. Every day I look at the site, I can see 2020. These are the overarching things that I'm trying to keep in my head, that I'm trying to work towards every day. I can see them front and center. They're not just something I have to click through to go see on a separate page. I think that'll be really valuable to have goals be big up in here with 4 different sections and all 4 of those sections visible. Then we have, where were we? Serenity, moving stats to its own page with an image link in the header. We're going to limit journal entries, entires, I spelled it. Let's edit that, to past 2 weeks and add endless scrolling for further viewing back in time. Let's edit that real quick. Journal entries. Awesome. So we're going to limit journal entries because right now I implemented journal entries on the site, but I didn't implement any pagination, it's called, where you create pages every certain amount of time. So right now I have all my journal entries, at least in the personal project right now. If you click on the personal project and you start scrolling, it's literally an endless page of journal entries that just keeps going. And you don't want to have that much data on a web page at any given time, so it takes up memory in the computer. And at a certain point, a web page that has too much data on it will actually start slowing down your computer. So it's really good practice as a developer to cut the amount of data. So rather than displaying every journal entry from beginning of time, I'll maybe only display the journal entries from the past 2 weeks. And then when you scroll to the bottom, it'll load the next 2 weeks. And then you scroll to the bottom and it'll load the next 2. That's called endless scrolling. And then if we needed to search for journal entries, let's say I wanted to find journal entries on May 12th, 2019. What did we do last year on this day? That's what you can see here in the Photoshop document. I have this search icon for, and then we'll think of other ways to maybe integrate like a filter on the journal page, or maybe even we show like last year's entries right next to it. So a lot of things we can do with that, but I think just for now, at some point this week, if I could just limit the number of journal entries being shown to 2 weeks and then allow that endless scrolling to go further back, I think that would be a good start, because we're starting to get maybe 6-8 months now since journal entries were implemented, and it's starting to become a lot of data. Even though I haven't been journaling that well every day, but at least we have some stuff in there. So that's pretty much what I have for myself this week in terms of personal with the YouTube work, and then of course Serenity with this app. I'm not really doing any other work on my other projects at the moment. I do have some backed up work on my project, Real Model Stories. I need to really start thinking about how I'm going to start this new project, the future of purpose. It's a really important project to me, but it's a longer term project. And it's also a project, both that and Real Model Stories are projects that I want to do in person with people. I've tried doing these Zoom interviews and they just don't work for me. It doesn't capture the same human element that I'm really trying to capture with these projects. And I think it's so important to be in person, to have these conversations in person, and to be able to capture that in a way that really, really gets to that human essence. So those are kind of on the back burner for me right now. Although I do have work to catch up on with Real Model Stories, so I do need to jump back into that in the next few weeks. I can't keep putting that on the back burner indefinitely, but I'm giving myself at least this week off in addition to the past few weeks. And then, of course, Frederickson Studios is my photo studio, my bread and butter work, the work I actually get paid to do. And, I don't know. I don't know when I'm going to be able to jump back into pursuing clients, touching base with clients. It still doesn't feel like it's the right time yet. New York is still in quarantine. People are still wearing masks everywhere they go. People are not going to bars and restaurants. You can order food out. You can hang out in the park. You can go for a bike ride. You can go for a skate. You can go for a run. You can go for a walk. But people are not going to work unless you're an essential worker. So I'm holding off on that. So we'll see. So anyway, that is the breakdown of where I'm at, what I'm working on this week, what my goals are for this week. And why don't we just jump into doing some updates on the web app right now? And if you're interested, come along for the ride. Let's jump into doing some web app updates. I'm going to give myself about 45 minutes, maybe a half hour. We don't want this full video to stretch over an hour. So that's going to be how I'm going to limit myself today, so I can do some edits on that video and try to get that published today. So we are working on Serenity, implementing timeframes for goals. I think what we need to do though first is to redesign the project's index page to include all goals, to-dos, and journal entries. And that starts here with this Photoshop document. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by getting rid of that activity section. That's going to be here in content, activity right there. And what we're going to do is instead of completely scrapping the graph, which we need to put into its own group here. So new group from layers. Let's just call this activity graph. That'll create a folder that only has the graph in it. What we can do then is we can grab that graph and drag it into the top menu. And then we're going to delete the whole activity section here that doesn't have the graph in it anymore. Boom. So that's gone. So now if we go up to the top menu here, we have our activity graph. We're going to put that right before the search button. And then we're going to resize it. You know what? First, let's add some guides. Zoom in a bit. And we want that activity graph to be the exact same height as my icons here, which I believe is 30 pixels. So now what we can do is we can drag the graph up, align it with that top ruler, and then just resize it like this to align the bottom with the bottom part of that ruler. And voila, now it is the same size as those icons. We'll drag it over here to be 40 pixels away from the other icons, exactly the same as they are from each other. I thought they were 30, but whatever, 40 is fine. And let's see how that looks. I don't like how wide it is. I think that that's unnecessary. So what we're going to do is we're just going to squish it. You know, you wouldn't do this in real life on the actual website, but we're going to just drag it like that. And we'll have to think some more further down the road. Let's make it 50 by 50, perfect square. Oops, I do 49. Let's do 50. And voila. We'll have to think down the road about how we want that to actually end up looking. I also don't like that it's a square and everything else is a circle. But we're not going to worry about that. We're going to leave that for now. So I think what that would mean is you could click on this at any point and it'll take you to an actual page that has all of the activity and graph information from the work that we've been doing on the website. So now what we can do is we can move goals up here. I'm going to get rid of this date for goals just because I think that there's a better way that we can implement that. Let's find where that is written. Let's collapse all of these. Here it is. No, that's not it. Well, what we can do. Oh, here we go. Weak header. Let's delete that. And voila, that is now gone. So we're going to hide tasks. We're just going to hide it right now because we don't want to delete it just yet, just in case we want to use some of that portion of the design. And now let's clear these guides. Well, we don't need to clear them. What we're going to do is we're going to create new guides right here that are going to house the goals section. So this one can come down to there. This one, I guess the bottom one doesn't really matter. So now we're going to drag the whole goals section up to here. And make sure it's snapping into our guides correctly. Close enough. And the bottom of it, you know what? We're going to delete that whole bottom. We're going to delete that whole bottom portion. I cannot clear that. So we have to actually find the layer that that's on. That would be goals BG. And voila, that is now gone. And we're going to make sure that we have that nice rounded corner. Well, first of all, you know what? Let's delete that too. We're going to make the goals BG extend all the way out to here. And I believe we have this on a 5 pixel edge. So we're going to smooth that 5 pixels and we are going to fill it Make sure that we have the right color here to fill it with, and fill it with that color. Shift F5, fill, not content aware. That's for photos. When you're doing some deleting of things in photos in Photoshop, you can use content aware, but we're just going to use the foreground color here. And voila, we have our nice full-sized goals backdrop. So we can start by dragging the new goals button over to there, and then let's bring it in, I think 20 pixels. 1, 2, 3, 4. That looks good. 20 pixels. The others look like they might be 30. So let's do 10 more. Okay. Now we can drag the background for the actual individual goals over to the edge right there. And that looks good. And now let's let's make another ruler here. This will be 30 pixels in from the edge, which seems to be the edge of where we are designing things. We're going to go to goal 1, and we're going to look at the project icon here, and we're going to drag that over to the edge. And for some reason, Photoshop doesn't always like to snap perfectly, so we'll zoom in and fix that with our keypad. So then we'll do the same thing on goal 2. Drag that over. Boom. And goal 3. All right, so now our journal can span the full width of the page, which is a lot, and I'm not entirely sure about just yet, but we're going to roll with that. I'm not going to bother even updating that on here. What I want to focus on, because that's an easy update on the website, it's just going to fill the full width. I don't have to worry about designing it. But in terms of the goals, I think what we want to do in this design document, the thing that we want to get updated to visualize how goals are going to work, is this separation of the different sections of goals. And you know what's funny? I should not have moved these projects over, because they're going to end up taking up a much smaller section. This goals box now needs to be split up into 4 quarters. We have daily goals, we have weekly goals, we have quarterly. What do you think? Should we do quarterly goals? I'm not sold on quarterly yet. Do I work in terms of quarters? My work is definitely seasonal, in the sense that I do have kind of like January and August are very slow periods for my actual paid work, and things start to pick up again with Fashion Week in February and September, and then they go right through up until like June, a little bit in July, and then all the way through December in the fall. So it's more like what would you call that? Half yearly. But if you break it down into quarters, so quarter 1 would be January, February, March. I could see that as being its own kind of grouping of the year. Then we have April, May, and June. That's definitely a significant season right there. That's a busy season, April, May, and June. February, March are kind of just starting to pick up leading into that. And then you have the summer period, July, August, very slow. And then September starting to pick up again. Things are getting busy. And then you have October, November, December, very busy in terms of work. So I could see that being useful. I could see myself setting quarterly goals. It just doesn't quite break down. Quarters don't break down exactly the same that my seasons do. But I noticed that a lot of other companies do that. It might be a nice way to kind of have the year split up into 4 segments, so that you can have smaller chunks that you're making goals for within the full year. So I think I want to do quarters. So we're going to do daily, weekly, quarterly, and yearly. So we need to split this up into 4 sections then. Let's go ahead and divide up this goals block. So the size of this block on our screen right now is from 1890 pixels to 660. So let's just pull up our calculator. 1890 minus 660 is going to give us 1230 pixels. If we divide that by 4, that's going to give us 307.5, which is really annoying, but we'll just do 307, 308, 307, 308, or something like that. So we were starting at 660 pixels is this line right here. That means we need to add 308. 660 plus or 307 is 967 is where our next one's going to be. So let's make a ruler right here. 965, I think, is close enough. And then let's add 308, was it? 615 will be our next one. No, that can't be right. We've already lost it. So we had 12. This is one thing I've noticed is trying to do certain things on camera and explain them. Certain things get much more difficult, like doing little bits of math in your head and holding numbers and explaining it. It's like your short-term memory gets overloaded and you lose it. And I feel like a complete dummy trying to walk myself through simple math problems in front of the camera and not being able to hold that information in your head. 1890 minus 660, I believe we have here. Yes. 1890 minus 660 is 1230. So that divided by 4 gives us 307. That's right. Okay, so we started at 660 plus 307 is 967. So we did 965. Then we do plus 308. Gives us 1275. 1275 plus 307 gives us 1582. We'll round that to 1580. Remember, these are just approximations. On the actual web implementation, we'll be able to make these actually solid quarters. But just for the visualization here, we just want to get close enough. And there we go. We have 4 separate quadrants for our goals section. So now, this is the question. What does this end up looking like? This is the reason we do this in Photoshop first rather than trying to implement it in the code and realizing we need to refactor things. We want to visualize the full way that this is going to look before we start jumping into the code. And I'm guessing, just from this immediate breakdown of these quadrants, that this is too small of a section for goals. Because you can see here, right here, finish new desktop design already doesn't fit on one line. And it would be nice if these could fit on one line. We also wanted to fit the actual projects that these goals are for as icons next to them. So maybe we don't do quarters just because it doesn't look good in the design. The other option is to make projects down below here and goals the entire width. I'm not sold on that because don't forget, goals need to work also on mobile. But I think on mobile, we're going to have tabs like we have right now, today, weekly, yearly. As soon as the web page gets smaller than a certain amount, we instead of having them laid out side by side, we do them individually with separate tabs. So can we fit 4? I would really like to do 4, but it's not looking good. If we did thirds, it would probably come up to right about here and here. And thirds might just work. This is an interesting design challenge where philosophically, I think quarters makes a lot of sense. Design-wise, it's not working. Sometimes you just need to sit with it for a little bit and kind of just visualize it in your head. Let's visualize what would it look like with projects down here and goals filling the whole thing. Do we want to actually sketch that? I think that's going to be too much space for goals. That would solve our problem of not wanting the journal entries to take up the whole width. Why don't we try that? That actually could work quite nicely. Even though projects, like that's your navigation for where you are on the site, it would be nice generally to have that in the upper left. That's kind of where that kind of design element usually resides, and it's kind of weird to have it further down the page, and it's like your navigation is happening down here while you have this whole goal section up here that's also getting updated, because usually when you have a navigation here, that applies to things below it, not things above it. You know what I mean? So it's weird that goals is above the navigation for zooming into different projects. So like from a design perspective, it's totally non-conventional to do it that way. And while being non-conventional can be a good thing, it can be good to break the mold. It's usually only good to do it if it makes sense. If there is some design reason that makes it better to have it that way. And the reason isn't just because, oh, I want to have more space for my goals. That's not really a reason. That's kind of just like me trying to find other ways to do something. But making your navigation below something that is also part of that navigation is just kind of weird. And I don't like it. The other option is to have the journal up where goals is and put journal and goals down below. But no, because journal is going to really take up a lot of vertical space on the page. You're going to scroll through multiple journal entries. So that makes more sense to be there at the bottom. And goals really needs to be at the top. Well, the other option is to really just not include quarterly. Another option that I hadn't really thought about is that because goals aren't really to-do items in the sense that it's like, here's this one tiny little thing that I'm going to do today. Goals are something that have a little bit more of a time frame to them and can get broken down into smaller sections. What if we don't need daily goals? What if we only do weekly, quarterly, and yearly goals? That's kind of something that I was catching hints of that making sense when I realized that I don't really enjoy sitting down every day and reviewing what are my daily goals today. It's kind of nicer to just be like, what are the weekly goals that I'm working on? What can I jump into today? And not have to like set actual goals for today, but have to-do items for today that fit into the goals for the week. I don't hate that idea. And then also to-do items, as they get checked off, will stay there for the full week. And you can see all of the to-do items from a given week in one section. I kind of like that. Question then. What if you don't finish a to-do item? Does it automatically get assigned to a new goal in the new week? I think we'll have to build a functionality for that. Sort of like if a goal doesn't get completed, or if parts of that goal don't get completed, how do you reassign those parts to a new goal for the new week? There's a lot that we're going to have to think through as we start to implement this. And this is what's really fun about doing these design projects, is especially when you can do both the design and the implementation. And I really love doing both, is that you learn so much in thinking about them from both perspectives. And what so often happens in design and engineering teams is that the design team thinks it through and exactly how they want it to look visually, but it doesn't always make sense with the way that things get implemented on the code side and the way that from an engineering perspective, things need to be constructed. And so when you kind of walk yourself through both avenues and come at it from both perspectives, you actually start to learn a lot along the way. And there's this back and forth that happens naturally within larger corporations where the design team or the engineering team comes up with their proposal, the design team comes up with their proposal, and then they go back and forth to kind of refine both proposals to get closer to an agreed upon state of what's going to work best from both perspectives. And I find myself doing that in both the design and engineering of this project. And it's interesting, I actually see within myself kind of playing both roles and kind of arguing with myself or coming to understanding with myself from the two different perspectives. And it's almost like you have two different people inside you that are kind of fighting for both. In this case, I think what I want to do, at least to start, just because design-wise it's going to work best with 3 and not 4 sections, I think I'd rather drop daily goals than quarterly goals. I like the idea of doing quarterly goals, and I think weekly, quarterly, and yearly is a good time frame for goal setting. I'm not sold on dropping daily goals. Like, what if you get up in the morning and you're like, today I want to work on my Serenity app. Today I want to make sure I skate to the office. Or it's a weekend. Today I want to make sure I get in a nice skate in the park. I want to make sure I do 100 push-ups. I want to make sure today I need to make my meal prep for the week. I can think of so many different ways that you can set goals for today that I don't want to lose that functionality. So the more I think about the way I'm going to be using this, the more I'm not sold on giving up on today. So what do we do then? Do we drop quarterly? Not sold on that either. How do we visualize daily, weekly, quarterly, and yearly in these small, tiny quadrants? Do we get rid of the project icon for each of them. Because the way this design looks right now, and the size of the icons right now, the size of, the project icons, the size of the click box, the size of the text, all of that is kind of designed for use on mobile. So when I load this up on my iPhone, when I load this up on my iPad, and I use my finger to be clicking on these things, the finger doesn't have as fine-tuned of a clickability as a mouse on a computer. So you need to make icons and things, and text even, a little bit bigger. And so we can't really make things smaller. We can find a way to do tabs. Tabs would give us the entire width for an individual section. So like right now we have today, weekly, and yearly as tabs, and then today's section could fill up the entire thing, but then we'd only see one at a time. We'd only see today's goals. We'd only see this week's goals. We'd only see this quarter's goals or this year's goals one at a time. I really was liking the idea of getting them all visible at all times. What looks like design-wise would work really well is actually halves, showing two at a time. So what if we still did tabs and we showed today's goals and this week's goals visible? And if you clicked on quarterly or yearly, you could view the quarterly goals and the yearly goals at the same time, or you could view the daily goals and the weekly goals at the same time. That's an option. And then, of course, the other option is just make the goals the full width. Well, what could happen then? And I don't hate this idea, actually, since we do have a decent amount of screen real estate here, and journal entries aren't really something that need to be seen front and center. It's more just a process that you write things down, the act of writing them down. It can be useful to review, but it's not what you're looking for when you first load the page. You're not looking at like, oh, this is what I wrote at 1 o'clock today. That's going into kind of a repository that can be useful to review. So if that falls below the fold of the browser window, that wouldn't be the end of the world. What if we did this? What if we kept projects here? Because that makes a lot of sense. That's navigation, top left. That's where that should be. Then we moved goals to the next line and made it the full width of the screen. We kept all 4 sections, today, weekly, quarterly, and yearly, all visible at the same time until the browser window starts to get too small, and then we tabulate them. And then in this section, we could bring the stats back. I really liked the idea of having the stats visible. I like that idea a lot. And that's so funny because we sat down here and started moving things around, and I think that we're going to go right back to where we started. How funny is that? Let's see if we can revert all of our changes back to when we opened the document. We can actually just do that right here. We open our history and we go back to the top there, and boom, that is where we started. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of tasks. We're going to hide it. We're going to make activity the full width of what tasks would have been there. So activity is going to be 2/3 of the page. Projects is going to be 1/3 of the page. We'll do that by dragging activity. Well, here's how I do this. I'll show you. I'm going to take this section of it. We're going to just cut that and drag it over to there. Zoom in, make sure that that is lined up right. It always goes 1 pixel over for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. And then what we can do is we can just take this portion of it and we'll just drag that across to line back up with that. The reason I did that is that I wanted to extend this part of the border over so I didn't have to redraw those corners. Then we're going to take, we're going to bring a ruler in 30 pixels from 660 to 690. That's our padding there. We're going to drag the title over to line up with that. Then we are going to bring our graph, and we're again going to have to make a group for that graph. Activity graph. And we're going to bring that over to line up with that edge. And now, if we extend that graph out, I don't like the way that looks either. What we have right now on the site, if you go to the projects index page, is just these the raw stats, I call them. So we kind of have to-dos and journal entries are the way that I keep track of how much work I'm doing just in general, how many to-dos I'm creating and checking off, how many journal entries I'm writing. And I like to look at the past 7 days and the past 30 days. And what I was thinking here is that this graph in activity would kind of show the total amounts of those. So all of the to-dos and journal entries I did on Monday, all of the ones I did on Tuesday, and you could see them graphed this week in this nice lavender color, and then last week in gray, so that you can kind of compare. This wouldn't make sense to spread this graph out to the entire width of this section, but what we could do is we could show the raw numbers here on the right. So we could say, how do we want that to look? You know, it's funny. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me to have this activity section be so large. It's not such an important part of the page. It would be nice if that were a small section in the top right, and then maybe having something in between projects and activity. Right now, if you look at the actual project pages, go here to Serenity. Oh, right, we had to-dos and pages there. What could we do if we did things in thirds? What else would be interesting to see here? You know, it's such a shame because I really liked the idea of having goals take up this entire section. And it just doesn't work for 4 goals. Sometimes design work, the answers are not immediately apparent. Sometimes you have to sit with it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just let activity sit in the top right there as one large section. And I want to just try visualizing what do goals look like if I do make them one full width section underneath projects and activity, and then move journal entries below that. Just to imagine what that's going to be like. And then we'll kind of come back to activity and think about what do we want to do there. It's a shame because, you know, there's so many different things that are weighing in terms of priorities here. I would like to have, well, we know we want to have projects in the top left. I've worked through the different variations of possibilities for that, and I'm pretty set on the idea that that's where that needs to be. So we'll start with that as kind of number 1. Number 2 is goals. Goals needs to be number 2, and it needs to be the number 2 thing that you see here. I would like goals to show all 4 sections. So that's the number 2 thing that we're trying to achieve. The problem is it doesn't fit next to projects. So having it on the next line, it's not ideal either. I would like it to fit next to projects. If I could have everything my way, I'd go right back to where we were. I'd get rid of the activity section. I'd have goals next to projects, and I'd have it split into 4 quadrants. But design-wise, those quadrants end up being too small. So how do we solve that problem? This is a really fascinating design problem because I don't like any of the solutions that I'm coming up with in my head right now. So what I was going to say is that sometimes in design, the solutions are not immediately obvious. And sometimes you need to, A, play around with things on the page as we're doing right now, and sometimes B, when you've really worked through all the possible iterations that are occurring to you, the possible iterations that you can come up with just right now, just visualizing it right now. When you've worked through all of those and none of them seem to be the right answer, none of them really are able to capture everything that you're trying to do in just the right way, sometimes you need to step away from the project and come back to it. And I'm kind of getting to the point where I think that maybe that is going to be the most useful thing at this point. So let's go back to where we were when we opened up the document. Tasks definitely is going to be removed because that's going to be part of goals. So we have projects, we have goals. We could potentially have activity where goals is right now. I don't hate that idea. That's kind of cool. For some reason, I like stats to be in the top right. It just kind of makes sense to me. But I don't hate having it where goals is. I really want goals to be on the top line. And I would like it next to projects. So in realizing that, I think what we need to do is let's go back to that state where we attempted to get goals on the top line and to just kind of play with different options for that. Maybe there's a way that we can get goals visible in 4 sections in a third of the page on the top right, 2/3 of the page. So let's go back to that. Let's hide tasks. Let's hide activity. Let's take goals and set our guides 660 to 1890. And let's bring this down there and let's drag goals up to, come on, doesn't want to snap for me. Get that position just like that. And let's fix our background for goals. Here we have goals BG. Let's say like here will be the bottom. Delete that. And then here will be the rest of it. You know what? Let's make that our foreground color. We'll delete everything inside that right now. We will modify selection to smooth it 5 pixels to get those rounded corners, and then we will fill it with the foreground color. Now we have our goals background. We're going to take our new goals button and we're going to put it 30 pixels in from the edge. So that would be 1890 to 1860 right there. And let's drag that over. Boom. Okay, now let's divide this into 4s again. Let's also get rid of this weak header here because we don't need that anymore. Let's divide goals into quarters. I think we said 660 plus 307 is 967 or 965. We'll round that. And then let's add another 308, 1275, plus 307, 1580. We'll round that too. And there we go. We have our 4 quadrants: daily, weekly, quarterly, and yearly. It wouldn't be the end of the world if it was just text. Finish new desktop design could go down on the next line. We could get rid of these project icons. The project icons I thought were going to be really useful to see which goal, which project each goal was a part of. Another option is to go back to the way that the website is designed right now. So the way the website's designed right now is on the projects index page, all you see is a list of your projects, and then you see the stats. And you don't show every goal, every to-do, every journal entry for all of the projects on this page. You can only see goals, to-dos, and journal entries when you look at individual projects. Projects, therefore, become isolated, separate groups. We could stick to that and not have every single project viewable here, at which point you wouldn't need to have these icons. You wouldn't need to have projects be color-coded. It would make the site less complex. Complexity in design and engineering can be a good thing. If it's not adding value, complexity is generally a bad thing. You want to keep things as simple as they can be and only make them as complex as they need to be. So right now we're running into an issue of limited space to be able to show the information that we want to show. How important is it to be able to show 4 different types of goals at once versus having them be tabulated? How important is it to show all of the goals for everything that you're working on a main index page? Those are kind of two competing possibilities right now. I really like the idea of being able to, from the main index page, see everything that I'm working on. And obviously this will change from user to user. So let's say that I'm collaborating on real model stories with someone else. They'll have their own personal section of the website, and then they'll have the real model stories section of the website that with things that are assigned to them. That's kind of like way down the road if I wanted to start building this for teams. I also should start keeping that in mind though. Can individual goals be assigned to individual people within a team? I think that that would be a really fantastic functionality. If we were to do that, then there's just no way that we can fit all of that information here like that. I think that what's going to happen is that goals is going to end up being 2 sections, not 4 sections. 4 sections just doesn't work. Let's get rid of that right now. It's just look at how silly that looks. There's just not enough space to fit everything that we want to fit in 4 sections. So when goals becomes 2 sections, how do we visualize goals in 2 sections? We can have daily and weekly. We can have quarterly and yearly. I think that's kind of cool. It's unfortunate that we can't see quarterly and yearly at the same time. It would be nice to have those always show up. Like when you get into the studio every day, you look up on the wall and you see, what are your goals for the year? They're always there, right? Every time I load this web page, my goals for the year are always there. But in lacking space, we knew that we were going to have to find a compromise here somewhere, just because all the options that are showing up for us, none of them are perfect. As far as all of the options that we've weighed so far, I think that this is the option that while we are giving up something just slightly, we're not going to be able to see weekly and yearly goals all the time. We're going to have to click a link to be able to visualize them. In terms of the other options, I think that is the best compromise that we've come up with so far. So let's run with that one. We can always sleep on this and come back to it with fresh eyes tomorrow. But let's run with that idea just so we can get some movement going again in this project. Maybe we've gotten a little bit too caught up in our head and trying to solve this problem perfectly. You can't always solve every problem perfectly, but you can at least hope to get as close to the best solution as possible. And I think that we've given it enough time for now. So sometimes you just need to get movement going into it again. Even if that movement doesn't end up being the final design, at least we can start stretching our fingers, stretching our brain a little bit with doing something. So let's operate on the idea that we're going to have 2 quadrants. We're going to show daily and weekly goals by default. Then there's going to be a link somewhere that says that says quarterly/yearly. So I think what we're going to do then is we're going to take the goals tabs and we're going to bring them up here on the same line as goals. And that requires a bottom edge like that. And then boom. And now what we've got is, let's bring the tab background on for weekly. And let's change the text from daily to be daily, weekly, and then yearly, we're going to duplicate. We're going to call them quarterly. Add a Y on the end of that. And we're going to drag yearly out. First, let's show ourselves the background so we can see exactly how big this tab is. And then we can add a guide. Having trouble seeing my screen with all these lights on in the studio. Okay, we didn't quite get our tabs over far enough. There. Sometimes you really got to zoom in to figure out where the edges are. I think we went over one too far. That looks better. Okay. So now we've got our yearly tab. We're going to drag the yearly tab over there. We duplicated it. Don't forget. So that looks good. And now the quarterly tab, which is the one we duplicated, is right here. We're going to call that quarterly. And voila, the spacing for the tabs is going to have to get a little bit bigger to fit quarterly. The other thing could be, instead of daily, weekly, quarterly, we actually use the text of day, maybe May 12th. May 12th. This could say week 20. This could say Q2. And this could say 2020. Let's hide the background for those because we're not quite sure how that's going to look just yet. Same thing with the weekly and daily tabs. All right. I think that daily should say Tuesday, May 12th. Now that needs to get spaced out a little bit better. Week 20 also needs to get spaced out a little bit better. Something like that. And then let's make them their own tab, daily/weekly. Let's drag the week text into that. Let's get rid of the weekly group. So now we have a daily, weekly, and then this one we'll call quarterly/yearly. Let's do the same thing there. We're going to drag the text from yearly into the quarterly/yearly group. We're going to delete the yearly group now. And voila, we have two separate groups and we can do backgrounds for each of them. Let's turn on this background. And let's make it go from like here, 870. How does that look? Maybe we put a slash between Tuesday, May 12th, week 20. So let's say Tuesday, May 12th / week 20. And let's center that inside of the tab. Then the same thing in the quarterly one. Let's delete 2020 and let's say Q2 / 2020. And move it over just a little bit. I'm not hating this. So now we have to think about navigation. Can you view past weeks, future weeks? That's not something I'm going to implement right away, but it's something that could be implemented. It would be nice to be able to click back in time and view what were my goals, what were the things I was working on in, let's say week 15 or quarter 1. The thing that's kind of got me a little bit hung up is that this totally makes sense. I have a tab for Tuesday, May 12th, which will be this part right here. And then this part right here will be week 20. And then if I click this, it makes the whole thing switch to becoming quarter 2 over here and 2020 over here, the full year. Now, if I navigate back to quarter 1, right? We're now viewing quarter 1 in 2020. What does this say up here? Does it say, for quarter 1, does it say January 1st, week 1? And then if you clicked that, you'd be able to view January 1st and week 1, and then you could go back and forth within that. That's probably how that would have to work. Versus here, if you were scrolling back through the days, you went back to May 11th, May 10th, or week 19th, week 18th, and all of a sudden you got back to what was now a week that was inside Q1. This would switch to Q1 just fine, /2020. If you got back to 2019, you'd end up in Q4 of 2019. That's fine. That makes sense here because this is always going to show what this is reflecting. But when you change back from Q2 to Q1, this has to change to something. It can't just stay as May 12th, week 20. It has to change to something, and it's probably going to have to change to saying January 1st, week 1, or October 1st, week 40, or whatever that is. So I think that's probably how that's going to work. We don't need to implement that yet. Right now, we're just working with goals for the current week. But it's nice to be able to think about, we do want to add that functionality. How is that going to work with our design? Because we don't want to design something that isn't going to be forward compatible in terms of functionality that we're going to be adding down the road. So the next thing that we want to be thinking about is also how is that navigation going to work? Are there going to be little arrows here? A back arrow and a forward arrow. I think that's pretty simple to add. So we don't need to worry about adding that into the design. Same thing can go for Q2 in 2020. When you click on that tab, make that tab active, then you have your little arrows. So what if, just to make our lives really easy, what if we start by only implementing daily and weekly goals? Then we can add in quarterly and yearly goals by adding this second tab. But just for now, to keep things simple, we have one tab. It's got the date. We don't have any navigation on it. And then those are things that we can kind of add piecemeal down the road. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm pretty happy with the way that this is working. Let's finish visualizing what this would look like with both the daily and weekly goals in here, because right now we only have the daily, which are listed as 3 separate goal groups. And we're going to create a new group for them called daily goals. We're going to duplicate that group. Well, first, let's make sure that we've got the background correct. So this is going to actually let's drag them up to be right there. Does that line up? Yeah. And we also want our alternating background to come up to right there. Boom. And actually, the daily goals need to be centered in that background. So somewhere right around there. Now, we want to make sure that the alternating goals background comes out to that edge, and 30 pixels in from that edge, that was 1275, comes to 1245. That's where we're going to want to see our project icons line up with. So that's goal 1. Then we have goal 2, personal icon, and goal 3. Frederickson Studios, not the whole goal, just the Frederickson Studios portion. And voila. Okay. So now, rather than creating three new goals, we're just going to copy those goals. So we have daily goals and alternating goals BG goes into that. And I just dragged it to the top. We actually want that at the bottom. Nope. Not inside. Right there. Okay. Now if we duplicate, no, come on. Let's get that inside this group. There it goes. Duplicate the daily goals group. And we'll call this weekly goals. We're not going to go so far as to like actually change the text or anything, but at least now we can visualize what that looks like if we drag that out to here. Voila. Something about our sizing is off. Oh yeah. Boom. Voila. Like so. Got it. Okay. So what bothers me about this? That's too much information. And it's not immediately clear what my eye should focus on. There should be a hierarchy of information here. And right now it just feels like a jumbled mess. Goals, Tuesday, May 12th, week 20, Q2, 2020. There's too much going on there. Then we've got goals for this week. We've got goals for today and goals for this week. Not working at all. It's almost like being able to see multiple different sections for goals at the same time becomes information overload. And even if we had it visible, but like no color or faded out somehow. So we had 4 separate tabs. But how do you have like an active and an inactive tab? It's almost like this section here can be either today or this week. This section here can be either this quarter or this year. And the quarterly and yearly goals would be faded out somehow unless you clicked on them. Then that would bring them into the forefront. It would fade out the daily and weekly goals. That could work. That could work. The only downside to that is that you're not seeing the daily and weekly goals as the forefront. You're seeing the daily and the quarterly goals, or the weekly and the quarterly goals, or the daily and the yearly goals, or the weekly and the yearly goals. It's an interesting concept. It's an interesting idea. I don't hate it. So rather than Tuesday, May 12th / week 20 being one tab, it would be Tuesday, May 12th, and then another tab, week 20, and then another tab, Q2, and another tab, 2020. And this one is faded out unless you clicked on it. So you'd have this interesting hierarchy. Let's just imagine if we call this, let's say, Q2 goals. You know, I'm kind of liking this idea. It's amazing what can arise when you start to really put things on the paper and move them around and try to play with it and kind of feel what works. Because, you know, you can have this philosophy of how you want the design hierarchy to work and what's important. But then when you actually get into laying things on the page, you start to find new patterns of ways of organizing the information start to emerge. And I'm really fascinated by this right now, because this isn't something that I ever would have considered or kind of come to had I not really worked through this process right now. Let's now take this section here and call it Q2 goals, and let's set the opacity to 50%. I like that. It's still there. It's still visible. It's still something you can notice every time you load the page, but it's not distracting your eye. It's not making you feel like it's competing with whatever the goals are that you're actively looking at right now. And if I were to click here, now these would become 100% opacity. These would become 50% opacity. And that would enable me to focus on those goals at any given time. So I think that this is starting to really come together. Let's now go back to our goals tabs, and let's split these back out into daily and weekly tabs. So we're just going to change the text here to say Tuesday, May 12th. That is one tab, and we're going to drag that all the way over to there. We're going to take our background, and we're going to drag it. Oops, even more than that. We're going to drag it way over. Do that again. Just kind of eyeballing how much padding I want on the sides of those, and maybe we'll actually create a guide for that. So this guide is like right there. This one's like right there. Let's see if those actually line up. Looks like they do. Okay. Now we've got, that's going to be our daily tab. Let's duplicate that. Create a weekly tab. Let's drag it over to here. And let's change the text to say week 20. I'm pretty happy with the spacing on that. And remember, the spacing on these don't have to be perfect. Because we'll get that right in the final design. This is more just a visualization. Okay. And it looks like we have an extra pixel down there, so we'll delete that. Okay, week 20. Now here's the thing. Week 20 is not currently active, so we're going to hide that tab. that's how that would look. Now let's update the quarter 2. So these become quarter tab, and it's just going to say Q2. And that's going to come over here like so. I don't know, something like that. It's going to be a smaller tab for sure. Let's make it that big. And let's visualize the background, but the color is going to be at 50%. So even though it's active, it's faded out. And if I were to click on it, it would make this the active one and it would fade this one out. If I were to click here, this would stay faded out, but this would disappear and it would go to week 20 as the design's being shown there. And then quarterly tab, let's duplicate that. Well, first let's get the background the right size. Okay, that looks good. And now we're going to duplicate the quarterly tab. We're going to call it yearly tab. And we're going to drag it out to here, but line it up with that edge. And we're going to change the text to be 2020. And we're going to give it some space like so. Give this some space on this side like so. Drag this out. Like so, and then hide that background because it is not an active tab. And let's see how this looks. All right, so imagine we just loaded up the page. Goals. This is what my eye goes to. That works. This is there. I can see it. Now, 50% opacity might not be the right opacity. Maybe it needs to be a little bit brighter. Maybe it needs to be a little bit darker. That's something we can easily play with down the road. Right now, this is working. I'm really liking this. If you highlight over these with your mouse, like right now, imagine they'll go to full brightness, just the individual ones that you can just like at a quick glance, just kind of like bounce through them. Obviously, this text on week 20 should be faded out as well. Right now, let's make that 70%, 75%. And same thing with 2020. Where are my goals tabs? There they are. And what's cool is we also can see now Tuesday, May 12th, week 20, quarter 2, 2020. Whenever you load the page, that's going to be, you know, your status of where you are in the year. I like this a lot. I think we did it. I think we found a design that's going to work for goals. We can keep the goals having projects, which is really nice. Is it going to work with assigning goals to individual people once we start adding teams to this? That's another question. You know, maybe instead of it saying Serenity, it could just have or we could also concatenate. You know, you can have the color of the project and you can only have it maybe be 12 characters. You don't show the full name of the project. So what if somebody names their project something really crazy, like Frederickson Studios, that's got a lot of characters in it? We can definitely shorten that. And then for the name, it could just be their initials and a color, or it could be a photo. We could use their photo. And that's not a whole lot of space. So that could just be like, boom, Serenity, and boom, the image of the person that it's assigned to. Yeah, that works. Again, way down the road. Who knows if I'm even ever going to have the time to implement something like that. That's the kind of thing also that I'm thinking about. Like, if I ever get to that point where I'm implementing teams, that means that I'm probably hiring people to work in my studio and I want to be assigning things to them. Hopefully at that point, we actually have a budget pay people to do some more of this implementation. But it's nice to think about potential, the possibilities that we can start adding into this app way down the road. And again, the goal, because this is just kind of a side project for me, it's nice in quarantine to have more time to work on this, to do some really nice long-term thinking design work, and then start implementing it piece by piece. But because it's a side project and it's just something for me to do to keep me busy and active and productive and feel like I'm building towards a more efficient and productive future, is that if I can just do a little bit of this every day, a little bit of this every week, I can organize it so I can see what I need to be working on. If I do have time to sit down and jump into it, I can quickly jump in and I don't have to have everything stored in my head, because in the past, that's something I've struggled with projects as they get more complex. And I do really well working on them when I have everything in my head. But if I have to leave the project and come back to it, or if I have to jump between projects, my productivity drops way down because it takes me so long to get back up to speed with everything that was in my short-term memory that I understood when I last left the project. So if I can get things organized like this so that I can leave them, I can jump between projects. Maybe one day I could build the studio big enough where I'm just playing CEO and I'm just doing the oversight. This is what's happening in this project. This is what's happening in that project. This is what's happening in that project. I can jump in and out of project to project, get up to speed, process things in my head so that I can be an effective agent for guiding the project in the right direction. That's the hope in building this app. So maybe one day it can also be useful for other people. We will see. But for now, it's all about getting this useful for me and giving me something to work on over the next few weeks. So anyway, I think we are way over time. We're at 90 minutes now on the video, almost. Hopefully that'll get cut down just a little bit in the editing. But I think we can call it a day. I think we got some good work done here. We made some real progress on how goals is going to look. Now, obviously, we could step away from this. We could come back to it tomorrow and be like, no, it's still way too busy and still need to do more design work on it. But I think, at least for now, we kind of worked through some of the problems that we were facing with the design implementation for goals. It's still kind of a weird, it's a weird thing. It's not immediately obvious. Like, what's this over here? Like, maybe I'm going to come back at this tomorrow and be like, it makes no sense to show that there. Just make the full width of it be one display. You're only viewing today. Why is Q2 visible there? Or maybe I can find a way to make that more obvious that that's Q2. I don't know. Things to think about, things to wrestle with, things to sleep on, things to, consider when we're implementing it. But I would really like to jump into the implementation tomorrow. So that's that for today. That's just me working through some design problems here. Hope you found that interesting. Again, if you are still along for the ride at this point and you do find any of this interesting, please leave me a comment, throw a like on the video. Let me know that you're engaging with this and this is something that you find useful or not, or whatever feedback you have. I'd love to hear from you. Again, this is for me, first of all. But I am doing this with the hope that with enough practice, I can get good at making these videos useful for other people as well. So your feedback would be much appreciated. With that, I will see you back here tomorrow. Hope you are safe and well and enjoying your quarantine, and have a good night.